Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This will be our presentation on the Battle of Moscow, the first great victory. So, introduction. On the 22nd of June, 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Their invasion was called Operation Barbarossa. Their objective was to destroy the Soviet Union in 4 months. This is a map of Operation Barbarossa. 4 months were given to the German army to take Moscow. And 4 months is a really little time period. But when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, they went through our territory very quickly. They thought that they could take Moscow and that they could win the war. They were wrong. They were proven wrong by the soldiers of the Red Army at Moscow. So, Adolf Hitler, the leader of Nazi Germany, believed that the German people need more living space, also known as Lebensraum in German. The Soviet Union was a perfect target because the Soviet Union was the biggest country in the world, with the biggest amount of territory, with the biggest amount of resources. And there was a relatively small amount of people living on it. And also, communism and fascism were mortal enemies. So, since the Soviet Union is an obstacle, the obstacle must be eliminated. After Hitler took most of Western Europe, he turned towards the Soviet Union. Here are images of German tanks advancing through the territory of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia in July of 1941. The German invasion was pretty successful. In 3 months, they had captured almost 500 kilometers of territory from the Soviet Union, and the Soviet army was retreating quickly. The War on the Western Front. Now, I call this title the War on the Western Front because the Western Front in the Red Army was the front against the German army. It was just called the Western Front. So here are images of 2 very important battles that we will discuss slightly later. But before that, in September 1941, Hitler took Kiev. Kiev, as we know, is the capital of today's Ukraine. Back then, Ukraine was a republic in the Soviet Union. It was a very big and rich republic, and Hitler had just taken it. He had also surrounded 800,000 soldiers of the Red Army. They were cut off from supply, they were cut off from the rest of the army, and they were dying but giving a fight. So, when those soldiers were dealt with, Hitler ordered his commanders to turn towards Moscow. Moscow had to be taken, because if you don't take the capital of the country remains undefeated. 3 tank armies were dedicated to this task together with several thousands of soldiers and thousands of airplanes. The operation was codenamed Typhoon. Typhoon was what the German High Command believed would be their victory. It would be a swift typhoon through the Soviet territory. On October 1st, the operation began, bringing relative success as the Germans, by the end of September, were 100 kilometers away from Moscow. And these 2 battles are the Battle of Bryansk and the Battle of Vyazma. Why are they important? Well, because in these battles, 2 of some of the best Soviet armies, the 19th Army and the 14th Army, were surrounded and destroyed by the Germans, leaving even less forces to protect the nation's capital. So, Siege of Moscow. Now, Moscow was not directly under siege. By siege, we understand the complete surrounding of a city or a country completely blocked off. Moscow was not blocked off from all sides. It was blocked from one side, the western side. The eastern side was absolutely free and open. But still, a siege, emergency situation was announced in Moscow. And on October 12th, Stalin gave the order to declare a siege situation in Moscow. This caused a lot of problems in Moscow. Why? Because the people were worried. The German army is right next to our nation's capital. They're right here. They'll come and they'll kill us all. They hit us all. And on October the 15th, evacuation began of very important institutions and facilities. Even the body of Lenin was taken from the mausoleum and taken to Gorky, a relatively safe city far away in the Soviet territory. Even Stalin considered leaving Moscow, retreating to Kuybyshev, which was another safe city in the Soviet territory. But later, he decided to stay in Moscow to show everybody that he was confident in victory and that the Soviet army would win. This is an image of the barricades being built in Moscow. As you can see, the barricades are being built relatively well, relatively strong, and the people are preparing for combat in the city, in the streets. This is part of these barricades are part of the Mazhaiskaya оборонительная линия, the Mazhaiskaya defensive line, which was built around Moscow in an attempt to halt German advance. It was built very quickly. Almost 3 million people, civilian people, worked on building this line of defense. So, a day later, on October the 16th, 1941, huge protests and panic began in the city as people were robbing stores, they were robbing shops, they were robbing government institutions. They were scared. Because of that, the NKVD is, at that time it was the KGB, so the NKVD was later renamed to the KGB, had to restore order in the city, which they did very swiftly. General Winter. Now, here is another very important aspect of the battle, because the German army, well, the German generals, after the war, always said that we lost the war because of General Winter. Who was this General Winter? Well, General Winter were very cold temperatures that were present in the Soviet Union, and which were not present in the Western Union. So, in the second half of October, strong rains hit the area. To be precise, on October the 19th, 1941. This created a lot of mud and a lot of problems and obstacles for both sides. The Germans could not advance, and our soldiers could not retreat. But we were at an advantage because we could prepare ourselves to defend even better. We could build more barricades, more everything, and that's exactly what we did. We also brought more soldiers to help us protect Moscow. This is an image, well, this is a map of the situation in the second half of October 1941. As you can see, the German army is still advancing towards Moscow, but their gains are not as big and they're slowing down. And here is an image of the German soldiers in the mud, which was created because of the heavy rains. Later, however, in the end of October, heavy cold temperatures hit, freezing everything, snow fell, and this kind of let the Germans advance for now, because the temperatures were not too low. And the Soviet army was still retreating toward Moscow. So, parade on the Red Square. As I said before, panic was in Moscow. There were protests, and they were stopped by the NKVD. But of course, that was not the way to deal with the situation. Okay, you'll stop the people. You'll shoot a couple of the people. That won't help. You need something to unite the people, to calm everybody down. And that's exactly what we done. On the 7th of November, 1941, a big parade was conducted in Red Square. Now, the 7th of November is a very important date, at least it was for the Soviet Union, because it was the day of the Great October Socialist Revolution. And before the war and after the war, every year, parades were conducted. And in 1941, a parade was conducted too. And the parade was very important because it united the people, and it told everybody, we are ready to fight. We will not go back, we will not retreat, we will fight. Here are some images of the parade. These are tanks rolling through the Red Square, and these are soldiers going through the Red Square. When the parade finished, forces which participated in this parade, so tanks, soldiers, artillery guns, planes, they went directly to the front line. So some of them died mere hours after the parade. So by this time, the German army was 35 kilometers away from Moscow. So getting closer and closer and closer. But at the same time, getting weaker and weaker because their supplies were depleting and new supplies were far away from coming to the German army. The final push. Now, after the parade, the German high command understood we had to do something really quickly. or else we'll be done for. We won't be able to advance, so let's get a huge army and let's push towards Moscow in one final push. For this, 51 German divisions were prepared to smash through the Soviet defensive lines. To compare, the Soviet army had only 30 divisions in that area and not that many volunteers. Yes, there were a lot of volunteers because the Soviet army was lacking people and lacking food. So the offensive began in the first half of November, and initially success was kind of good for the first few days, but then the temperatures got even colder, and the German army had no winter clothing, no warm winter clothing. We did. The Soviet army, we have ushankas, we have valyinki, so they have warm clothes, and the Germans don't. They were not prepared for temperatures of -40 or anything like that. Their tanks stopped moving, their guns stopped firing, the rifles stopped working. It was not good for the Germans. So, counteroffensive of the Red Army. By December 2nd, the German offensive had completely stopped. They ran out of fuel, and as I said before, their equipment had basically stopped working, which meant that it was time for the Red Army to start a counteroffensive, to push the German invaders away from the capital. So, by that time, special divisions had arrived from the Far East. The Far East is basically the border with Mongolia and China. So, approximately 40 divisions arrived from that front to help the forces near Moscow. And here I would like to mention one person who was very important and did a lot of things to help the Soviet Union win the war. And actually, he was the person who let the divisions be transferred. If it was not for him, we would have never transferred these divisions. His name was Richard Zorgin. He's probably one of the best known spies in our history. He was a Soviet spy who worked in Japan. And thanks to his information, we got the possibility to transfer troops from one side of the country to another without being scared of being invaded by Japan. So, on December the 5th, the Red Army began one of the greatest battles in history, which was known as the counteroffensive near Moscow. And the first great defeat for Nazi Germany in World War II happened there. Before that, the German army was successful. They marched through European capitals like they were nothing. They had taken France in 9 weeks. 9 weeks. France, one of the strongest, one of the best countries of Western Europe, had fallen to them in 9 weeks. And here was the big, major defeat. They didn't take the capital, they didn't complete their plan, and they lost a lot of men and equipment. Starting from the first day, the Germans retreated very quickly. As I said before, they had no supplies, they had no winter clothes, so there was only one option left: surrender or retreat. So here is an image of the Soviet army advancing. As you can see, it is soldiers in special winter uniforms, so absolutely covered in white, with a tank. This was known as подвижная группа, so basically a motorized group. And these groups would go deep into the German lines, trying to destroy everything that they could, or capture soldiers, or valuable points or cities. And Hitler did not want to believe that he could not take Moscow. They were so close. They were 35 kilometers away from Moscow. The German soldiers could see through binoculars the Red Square. They could see Moscow, and now they had to leave. This is impossible. And the Third Reich, that's how Nazi Germany was known, the Third Reich, it suffered a defeat. That's impossible. So what he did was he started a small purge in the German High Command. So he removed a couple of generals from their posts. He placed new commanders in charge of the different armies near Moscow, so that they would actually fight. Because the previous generals kept saying, "We've lost. We can't take Moscow. It's impossible." The new generals said, "We can take Moscow." Also, a very important point here is that Hitler ordered special units of the German army to be equipped with the best weapons and to stand behind the other German troops, so that if the German front lines start retreating, those soldiers with the best guns would shoot the people who were retreating. So a version of the Soviet Strafbat. And yes, despite all of these measures, despite all the changes in command, despite all of these units, special units, which were supposed to shoot at their own comrades and soldiers, the Red Army pushed the Germans back 200 kilometers away from Moscow on all fronts. So here's a map. If the Germans were here by the 2nd of December 1941, by January they were already here. This was a very big defeat, very big defeat. And right now we'll talk about some of the heroes of this battle. So the first hero that we see over here is Konstantin Konstantinovich Rokossovsky. Rokossovsky was one of the best generals and one of the best officers in the Red Army. He was Polish, so he was born in Poland in the old Russian Empire, and then he served in the Red Army. He commanded one of the strongest and one of the best equipped armies, and one of the most heroic armies, the 16th Army. He was very good at strategy. He was very good at surrounding and destroying enemy troops. And for the Battle of Moscow, he received one of the most precious rewards that an officer or a soldier could get in the Soviet Army. The title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The second man over here is Georgy Zhukov. Georgy Zhukov is probably the best known Soviet commander because he eventually became a deputy to Stalin himself. And during the Battle of Moscow, he was the man who controlled everything, controlled the events near to Moscow. He was Stalin's deputy, so he was almost the second in command of Stalin. And the third man over here is Konev, Ivan Stepanovich Konev. He was a very good general too. He is known in the Battle of Moscow. He is known for creating an army out of nothing. So he got an order to create an army, and there were no units to be given to him. He was told, you will create an army out of the troops that are retreating from the front line, out of the units from the destroyed armies. And he did just that. And that army fought very well too. And now the second part of our heroes' photos, because the first part was more of the commanders, more like generals. And these are more of the simple people, more like ordinary people. So the first people that I want to mention are these. These are the 29 Panfilovs. Now, these people, they were part of the 316th Division, which actually was under command of Rokossovsky in his 16th Army. They were commanded by General Panfilov, and they are known for defending Moscow when there was no one left on that section of the front line except for them. So there were 28 people left from their division in that area, and there were German tanks, to be exact, 60 German tanks advancing towards them. Instead of retreating, they stayed there, and they won the battle. Most of the German tanks were destroyed or were retreated. Almost all of them died, almost all of them, but the position that they were defending was still controlled by the Soviet army after the battle. These people, so this is an image. I don't know if you can see the image, but it shows a lot of old people here. Now, this is an image after the war, so it was not taken during the war. These were soldiers of the Подольское училище. Подольское военное училище. They were basically cadets of the Soviet army. They were preparing to become soldiers, officers, future commanders, engineers. But instead of becoming officers, they were rushed and were put on a section of the front line, a very important section of the front line, with almost no guns. They had almost no guns. They had a few rifles. And as one of the soldiers who survived that period said, we had to steal guns from the Germans, and we had to steal coats from the Germans, which were not warm at all. Now, most of these people are age 60, 70 in the photo. At the time of the war, they were 18. So they were teenagers. They were almost like me. They were slightly older than me. And instead of retreating, instead of running away, they stayed there and they stood their ground, not retreating a single step. And there were approximately 2,000 cadets before the war began in the Podolskaya Военное училище. But after the battles that they participated in, only 300 people remained. So very big losses, very big losses. And the third hero that I would like to mention is a girl that is very widely known in the Soviet Union, named Zoya Kosmedinianskaya. She is probably one of the most famous heroes of the Battle of Moscow because she was captured and tortured by the Germans. And little people know that her objective was to fulfill an order given by Stalin himself to destroy a very important objective behind the German front lines. So she and her group of volunteers, they were volunteers, they were not soldiers, they were just volunteers, they got an order to destroy a very important objective from Stalin himself. And she, when the war happened, she was 17 years old, if I'm correct, 17 or 18 years old. So again, she was very young, and instead of surrendering, instead of giving in to the German torture, instead of saying, I give up, I can't do it anymore, she continued to fight back, and she died. She was hung by the Germans. So the second battle of Borodino, this is a very interesting moment of the Battle of Moscow because, as probably most of you know, there was the Battle of the Borodino in 1812, when the Russian army fought against Napoleon. But during the Battle of Moscow, there was a second Battle of Borodino, where on the field, the soldiers of the Red Army held back a very special unit of the German army. It was known as the French Volunteer Legion. So they were French soldiers from the former French army who volunteered to fight in the German army. And before the battle, one of the biggest generals in the German army, Field Marshal von Kluge, said, "You will have to do what your ancestors couldn't do. You will take this field." And they did, because the battle, even though the battle was very hard and there was little space to fight on, because the whole field is filled with different memorabilia, with different statues for the fallen, for the battle, they still fought back. And in the end, our soldiers had to retreat because they were getting cut off from the rest of the army, and nobody wants to get cut off. Like everybody just, they got an order to retreat. So conclusion, the German defeat of Moscow showed the whole world the might of the Soviet Union, the might of the Soviet people, how strong we are, and how we cannot be defeated. And this is an example of one of the propaganda posters. So this is a Soviet soldier killing a snake, a black snake, in the form of a swastika. So the snake represents Nazi Germany, and the Soviet soldier represents the Soviet Union. And this also showed to the world that Nazi Germany could be defeated, that they were not victorious at all times, that the German military machine was not the strongest, that there were people who could rival it, a country that could rival it. And after the battle, there was an outbreak of resistance. So, for example, the French resistance became more active. The resistance in Yugoslavia became more active because of the defeat of the German army at Moscow. This battle also showed that the forces of evil will never prevail over the forces of good. And for a regime built on hate and fear, as Nazi Germany, because hate was towards the Jewish people, the Slavic people, different people just because of their religious beliefs or because of their skin color, and never a regime built on destruction and killing others. So Nazi Germany's objective was obviously to take over most of the world and to kill off almost everybody except for the Aryans. Aryans were German people. And never will a regime like that, an evil regime like fascism, conquer the world. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any questions? хочу добавить для твоего знания, что произошло там под Москвой. Хотите, чтобы я сказал? Под Москвой этот мороз, который случился, он был необычен в то время. Немецкий расчет был правильный, они должны были взять Москву. Но икона Казанской Божией Матери облетела Москву трижды по приказу Сталина. Потому что Сталин получил письма от святых из-за рубежа, из-за границы, из Сибири о том, что если он вернет возможность русским людям, советским, русским людям молиться Богу, вернет священников в церкви, вере не будет препятствий, то тогда, только тогда, эта победа будет возможна для Советского Союза. И вот икона облетела Москву трижды. И в результате этого, вот в ночь перед наступлением немецкой армии, немецкие танки просто встали, замерзли, не смогли завестись. Им стало холодно, замороженными руками они стрелять не могли. Их реакция была совершенно невозможная против тех, кто одет был в тепло. Вот поэтому эта победа стала возможна. Не потому что...
Казанская Божья Матерь, who was also flying 3 times around Moscow, like крестный ход в небе. And after that, winter started to be more cool, kind of change started, like miracle. But Vladimir, I still very agree with Leonid. Of course, this is very important prayer of people for victory, but also all these incredible people who were there in the right time was sent by God. This is made victory for battle of Moscow.
Все вместе.
Everything together.
So I want to make a comment as well. I understand that on the Russian side, there are roughly 20 million people, including civilians, who died during the course of that war. Whereas on the European side, about 650,000 died, mostly soldiers. There's a huge disparity, and Russia suffered enormously during the course of that war, and eventually survived and became a great nation again as it is now. But I don't think people understand the significance of the losses that Russia endured. Okay, well, 27, well, that's different from 600,000 on the European side.